My name is Seb Lozier, I work for the IRB, and it is my happy duty to introduce the panel and the panelists for our second session, Optimising Olympic Participation.
The Olympic Games is the biggest showcase for sport worldwide, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity for your sport. Millions of people who would never normally tune in to watch a rugby match will tune into the Olympics in Rio, and for the first time ever your sport will be broadcast to millions who would never normally see that sport, and they'll be seeing it for the first time, and I think they will love it. What will Rugby Sevens bring to the Olympic Games? Rugby Sevens will bring a great new youth culture, and I think you have a great future with the youth of the world for Rugby Sevens, both male and female. Especially a female, I think it will be a super success. I would remind everybody that there is no given anymore, that you will continue on the programme, and I only have to mention the word wrestling to give everybody in the room an idea of what can go wrong and what can happen. Basically, it is now up to yourselves to organise a very good lobby with the IOC members throughout the world to make sure that they are acquainted with the sport, they know how it works. But first of all, of course, you've got to run a hugely successful Games in Rio in 2016, which I have no doubt but that you will. I go back to the IOC session in Mexico 2002, and then Singapore 2005, I think it was. As you know, baseball and softball exited at that stage. And in my own sport is judo, and the International Judo Federation asked me back in 2002 to start a lobby internally amongst my colleagues in the IOC to make sure that when these sports came to be evaluated, that judo would never be in the danger zone. And that's exactly what happened. So now I think rugby has to do the very same, because if the same system continues with the IOC, every sport will be evaluated after the Games in Rio.
Now, the vision of the Olympics is to contribute to building a better world through sports. We do that through educating the youth, and it's built on the 3 Olympic values, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, right? Excellence, respect, and friendship. What I think is really impressive about the IOC, 90% of our revenues go back to the movement. Only 10% are used for administrative costs. I think it's a pretty impressive figure if you look at a lot of the nonprofits out there. A lot of that money is distributed through programs by Olympic Solidarity and also through the continental associations. The IRB will set qualification standards, minimum qualification standards. However, the NOC may have higher qualification standards. I know, for example, in field hockey, the qualification for the games in Africa is to win the qualification tournament. However, I know some countries don't take that automatic qualification because they don't want their teams to be complacent and think, oh, this is easy for us to win. There aren't many high-level field hockey teams in Africa. We can win this tournament very easily. So they don't want them to be complacent. They want them to be competitive. So they say, great, you may win that tournament, but you have to win additional tournaments. So again, the NOC is responsible for selecting those teams and those athletes to the games. So right now, if you look at a lot of the countries, like some of the more developing countries in Africa, maybe in some of the small countries in the Pacific, in South America, the really popular events in the Olympics are boxing, judo, taekwondo, et cetera, the combat sports. Why is that? Because they don't need a lot of infrastructure to play those sports. Rugby is the same thing. Rugby Sevens is going to be, I think, very exciting for the Olympics and really help spread the games.
I've come from a country where rugby was really popular into a country where rugby is a growing sport, and some of the things that I've noticed, so I came from New Zealand into Canada a couple of years ago, and some of the things that I've noticed is that being now an Olympic sport gives rugby huge credibility. It's talked about a lot more, so even when we're talking rugby in the press, etc., they all talk about it as the new Olympic sport. So there's a growing recognition and publicity around rugby, and it certainly opens up a lot more doors. So as an example, we've got a strong relationship with our NOC, our governing body, and it's given us access to significant levels of funding for both our men's and women's programs. As an example, we're now employing 8 staff full-time directly off the back of Olympic funding, and it's into the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars of funding.
Having the Olympic Games in Rio 2016 gave the Brazilian rugby community a huge opportunity to increase and develop the game there. And the Brazilian Rugby Union is committed with the development of the game in all levels, having produced a pathway for all players, coaches, referees, and that want to take part regarding the growth of the game in countrywide. Sorry, my English. Brazil is a very sporty country, and probably the place in the world which have the biggest dominance of a single sport, which is football. And that can be very viewed as a challenge, but also as an opportunity, as people enjoy very much sports in the country.
It's important that we play our roles. I mean, they talk about the Olympic family, and I think that means, and what we've noticed already with the meetings that we do in Lausanne, there are all sorts of different aspects to being a member of that Olympic family. If you're an international federation, there are all sorts of pressures that don't come to you from government and so on in order to find what's best practice, good governance models and so on. But certainly when you're mixing with other international federations in an Olympic context, you're all competing a little bit, you're sharing best practices, you're talking about governance, you're talking about integrity in the sport, whether it be anti-doping, whether it be gambling issues and so on, player welfare or athlete welfare as we talk about in the Olympics. So just being in that Olympic family, in that environment, there is an enormous amount for a federation to learn, but also to contribute. It's like being a member of any family. You've got to, you take out, but you've got to give back. And we think we're already taking an enormous amount out of it, which has been very helpful to our federation. But we also think that we're contributing in many areas, whether it be some of the working groups where we have people in education working groups and legal working groups and integrity. And we've built up ways of doing things which I think are a help to the Olympic movement, as well as ourselves gaining from that participation.
Some people might think going to Brazil, they don't have a rugby culture, but I think that's a bonus, because you open up the possibilities to so many new people who will be watching this event live and watching it on TV. And I think until they see the atmosphere in the stadium, like as I mentioned earlier too, the Hong Kong Sevens and the ones I've seen in the final of the Commonwealth Games, it's a fabulous event. In fact, I forgot to say earlier on, I found it strange in the beginning when I was working with Bernard and other people that traditional rugby countries found it the most difficult to accept the sevens. They were clinging to the 15s, but I think the 15s will always remain strong, but I think the sevens has a brilliant future.
What I've got from this is, yes, you're in. You need to optimise that. You're going to get. You're going to be seen around the world. The game's going to grow. We've got to have the competition structures in place, and we've got to have the development process in place to cope with it. So, thank you very much, panel.